My name is Taylor Wade, and I'm presenting on unmanned aircraft systems in the National Airspace System. For the introduction, I'm going to talk about licenses, certifications, regulations, UAS around airports, UAS operations, human factors, next gen, and UAS. Operating UAS in the ATC environment. So to start off the presentation, I was just going to talk about what a UAV is, and the International Civil Aviation Organization defines a UAV as an unmanned aerial vehicle is a pilotless aircraft in the sense of Article 8 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, which is flown without a pilot in command on board and is either remotely and fully controlled from another place, ground, another aircraft, or space, or programmed and fully autonomous. So the FAA defines that there's a couple different types of UAS flyers. So educational, there's two options for that under Part 107, or fly as a recreational flyer or part of a modeler. The second part would also modeler for community-based organization. Then public safety and for the government, so like search and rescue, for first responders. The next type would be certificated remote pilots, including commercial operators. So some operators are not covered by Part 107 and will require a waiver, and there are some common examples of Part 107 sections that are subject to waiver. So it would be daylight operations, operation from a moving vehicle or aircraft, visual line of sight, visual observer, operation of multiple small unmanned aircraft systems, yielding the right-of-way, operation over people, operation in certain airspace, and operating limitations for small unmanned aircraft. And that's all Part 107 from the FARs. Another type would be the recreational flyers and modeler community-based organizations. So they have to register their drone and mark it on the outside with the registration number and have the proof of registration. They have to follow the safety guidelines that are based in their community or with their organization. Fly their drone at or below 400 feet when in uncontrolled or Class G airspace, and not fly in controlled airspace around many airports. So you don't want to fly in controlled airspace around or above many airports unless you receive airspace authorization for operations in controlled airspace through low altitude authorization notification capability, also known as LAANC. And before you fly, you have to do this, and you can go on the FAA's website to see more about this. And the FAA has a lot of things on their website about getting the prior authorization and just the basic keeping the UAS in line of sight, and just not flying in what airspaces to fly in, and that you're not supposed to be in the prohibited airspaces. So my topic that I did for the discussion board last week was about the air taxis, and that's kind of why I picked doing like airspace and UAVs, because just thinking about ATC and how in the future UAVs will be affecting other aircraft in the system possibly, and not being in the line of sight and possibly just operating under IFR conditions. And just overall how it's going to be incorporated with next gen. I did include a little bit in my slides about that. That will be talked about later on. And then there's just also a lot with predictions on how many UAS operators there will be in the future. So that's a really big thing to think about right now, is how the FAA will regulate how the pilots are flying in the airspace. If there are these air taxis, how are they going to operate in busier airspaces? I know the one that I read was about in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but just thinking about if it's in a busier airspace like LA, O'Hare, New York, how is that going to be regulated? Regulations, and we talked about it in class, but just to kind of reiterate what the regulations are, because it does go along a lot with the air traffic control system in the national airspace. So the small UAS rule, also known as Part 107, so the unmanned aircraft must weigh less than 55 pounds, and it needs to be in a visual line of sight. At all times, the small unmanned aircraft must remain close enough to the remote pilot in command and the person manipulating the flight controls of the small UAS for those people to be capable of seeing the aircraft with vision, unaided by any device other than corrective lenses. So there's also the daylight only operations, civil twilight, so 30 minutes before sunrise, 30 minutes after sunrise. The UAS have to give way to other aircraft. The maximum ground speed is 100 miles per hour. Maximum altitude of 400 feet above ground, and they must remain within that 400 feet AGL or lower. The minimum weather visibility has to be 3 miles from the control station. Operations in Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo airspace are allowed with the required ATC permission. And no person may act as a remote pilot in command or BO for more than one unmanned aircraft operation at one time. You can't be in a moving aircraft to operate a UAS, and not any moving vehicle in a unless it's in a sparsely populated area. And then also the no careless or reckless operations or carriage of hazardous materials. And then it's also a really good thing to pre-flight the aircraft before flying it. So next is operating safely. So this is really big with SMS. So safety management systems, I did include on the next slide, like the risk matrix, and that's something that you should always go through before flying, or just in general any job. It's great to go through that to see what potential risks, hazards there are before doing the job that you have to do. So you want to identify the risks, point out the safety concerns, know the policies and procedures, and just make sure that the UAS is in your line of sight. There's the hazard risk chart, and I did get this from one of the Purdue Journal of Aviation Technology and Engineering, and I did put a link on the bottom to that article, and it's also in my reference. So this topic, operating UAS around airports, this was really interesting to me, and I got a lot out of this article. So there's a lot of advantages. Some that came out of the article were the surveillance. So if you have a UAS operating at an airport, you can use it for surveillance. More customers for the airport, especially for UAS operators. So with Amazon, FedEx, I believe Walmart also was looking into it in one of the studies I read. There's a bunch of places looking into it, but basically any industrial area would be great to have like a pad for UAS operators to launch out of. And then something that I had come up with would be like having FOD checks on runways or taxiways. It's quicker and safer because you're not having someone drive out on the field, an active runway, looking for FOD. Why not just have a UAS go right down the runway, scan, see what's there, and just have a vehicle on standby to pick up whatever FOD there is. For operating UAS around airports would be, are they going to have transponders on them? I know that was a really big thing with next gen, positive separation from aircraft, because there always is those human factors of maybe you're not in the right mindset, you're getting sidetracked, so you're not fully paying attention, minimum performance capability, so knowing what your UAS can do, identifying the risks that come along with it, and then overall just the public approval and privacy, because that is a really big thing now, that people aren't okay with drones flying around over their houses because they believe it will interrupt their privacy. So just some human factors, mainly just questions, and that's out of one of the articles that I read. So did a flight plan get filed? Did the operator follow normal procedures for departure, climb, out and landing? Was communication established? So that's one of the things in Next Gen that one of the articles I read was talking about, and it was how are the UAS operators going to communicate with ATC if they're going to be out of the line of sight, if it's in a busier airspace. Also see and avoid, being aware and able to initiate emergency procedures when needed, respond to the controls in a timely manner. Can the operator respond to the controls in an expeditious manner also? Maintain a safe distance from icing, turbulence, convective weather, and just overall the situational awareness of the pilot. So here's the ones about Next Gen and UAS. I did include a chart of what the FAA plans on having done over the next couple of years and what has also already been accomplished. I know just from my internship at the center, there has not necessarily with UAS, but there's been a lot that has already been accomplished with Next Gen. So one of the things was trajectory-based operation, so TBO, will provide automated separation for the trajectory. Two-way communication from the operator UAS and ATC, and the FAA is working on UAS integration into Next Gen. 2016 it started, going to 2025. So operating UAS in the ATC environment. So you want to maintain communication, see and avoid. Is there going to be a transponder? ADS-B, that was also one of the things they were talking about. Is that going to be implemented on UAS so that everyone kind of is aware of what's going on? Airspace, so are they eventually going to be able to go into the higher levels of airspace right before alpha airspace, or will they eventually be able to go higher, whether it be for the military or not? What will it be like in the future, and then will more UAS operators be able to fly IFR in the future? My references a lot was from Purdue. Their scholarly articles from the Journal of Aviation Technology and Engineering had a lot of really good information, and the FAA did too, on what's just going to come from the future.